We are so blessed and fortunate to continue on with our Fall Forum series. And like we said last week, we always reach out to all the candidates who are running and invite them to come on to have a conversation. And for those in the PA 17th, we are very honored to be joined by Democratic candidate Chris Deluzio today.
Pleased to be here. Thanks for making some time for me to come on.
Thank you for making time for us. I know it's been a busy campaign season. Can you just talk about some of the things you've been up to in the past couple of weeks?
Absolutely. We're working hard across the district. It's the best congressional district in the country. For folks who may not know, we've got all of Beaver County, a big chunk of Allegheny County surrounding Pittsburgh, neighborhoods east like Penn Hills, Wilkinsburg, Oakmont, Verona, Churchill, Edgewood, a bunch of places. We've got all the North Hills, everything north of the Allegheny River that's not the city of Pittsburgh, and then west down to the South Hills and places like Dormont and Mount Lebanon. So it's a huge district. Been getting out there, knocking doors, meeting people where they are at a lot of community events, union halls, you name it. So we're really trying to earn votes and support and feeling, frankly, a lot of enthusiasm for our campaign.
We talk about getting out there. Can you just talk about some of the things that motivated you to run for this federal seat?
Oh, yeah. Look, I come to this from a place of public service. My background, I grew up here in the district, west of Pittsburgh. And I went off to the Naval Academy after high school. The 9/11 attacks were my senior year of high school, to give you a sense of my age. And, I served in the military. I deployed at sea a couple times. I deployed on the ground to Iraq. And that really shaped me and my commitment to not just our country, but our region, this place we call home. And that's what drives me to want to run, to want to ask folks for their votes, to go down to Washington to serve for all of us. And frankly, I think it's a job and a fight worth having and doing. I think people know that for way too long, our government has been rewarding wealth and not work, has been threatened by folks on the right who want to divide us in all the ways we're used to seeing, whether it's by the color of our skin, who you love, where you're from, how much money you have, you name it. And I think we know that those divisions really hurt people, and that we're strongest together. And I always talk about solidarity and fighting for our common good in this campaign. And frankly, that's what I'm hoping to bring to the Congress.
Talking about bringing things to Congress, what are some of the issues that you see most impacting people of the 17th? And what are some ways that you think federal support will be able to engage?
It's a great question. I think one of the things I hear from folks a lot in different parts of the district, different age, you name it, people are worried about how expensive life is. And I think if we aren't willing to confront the most powerful, the biggest corporations in this country, who are gouging folks from the grocery store to the gas station, who have frankly pushed for decades to ship our manufacturing and our jobs to places well beyond Western Pennsylvania, all over the planet. If we don't start pushing back and bringing our supply chains back home, start making stuff here, protecting union jobs for people all over Western Pennsylvania, we're not going to see things change. And that's a big part of what I'm hearing from folks and what I'm hoping to fight for in the Congress. I also hear pretty regularly how angry and fired up folks are to fight for our freedom and our rights. And I think people know what this Supreme Court did in overturning Roe v. Wade, attacking reproductive and healthcare freedom for women. It's not the end of things. It's likely the beginning or one of many attacks. We're going to see more to come. So I'm hearing people very concerned about that and other threats to our freedom. And people are worried about this democracy of ours. In my post-military life, I've worked to protect our elections and our democracy. And I think people around here correctly sense threats to our elections, threats from candidates and extremists on the right who were frankly participants in the January 6th insurrection. Doug Mastriano, who's running for governor, was there, participated. The guy I'm running against has campaigned with Doug Mastriano, has welcomed endorsements and support from people who not only did nothing when it happened, but actively fought to overthrow our electoral college votes, our votes here in Pennsylvania in the 2020 election. So I think the threats and the concerns around our government are real and strong. I hear about them from people every day in this district. And I'm doing everything I can as someone who's worn the uniform, who's sworn the oath before in my life to protect our democracy, to protect our freedom, to make sure that we have a strong government that's serving all of us.
And you talk about these threats facing our democracy. There is a real life possibility that no matter what happens in November, that there may be people who do not accept the election results. And if you win, how are you preparing to respond to questions about the legitimacy of this election and the outcome?
I certainly can't control bad faith actors on the fringe on the right who similarly participated or encouraged the January 6th insurrection, who's peddled lies around the 2020 election here in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. But what we can do, what I can do, is to make sure that we're voting, that we're protecting people's voices at the polls, and that we protect the integrity of our results. When we win elections, we expect those who lose to graciously concede. There are norms around that behavior that apparently those on the right have thrown away, and I can't make them change. But what I can do, and I can promise folks, is I am committed, as I've always been, to protecting this democracy, and I'm going to fight for it through November and after, whatever the threats may be on the far right.
Thank you so much for that. And you've been doing a lot of campaigning. Have you been surprised about the amount of attacks that have been levied at you? Were you prepared for those, or are they like, this is what you're mad that I'm a professor? Like, how are you like navigating like some of these attacks and these attack ads?
Well, look, I'm tough, so it doesn't bother me. And frankly, when you are willing to stand up to the most powerful corporations on the planet that have hurt people around here, unions and union workers, and small businesses too. It's not just all of us as consumers and workers, it's small businesses who have suffered. They're going to come after you. Look, they're spending north of $7 million to come at me here in Western Pennsylvania. And frankly, when you have groups like the Koch brothers founded groups who are backing my opponent, who are paying for things like mail and literature on people's doors, they don't do that if they aren't scared that they're going to lose some power. And I think they should lose power. I think most folks around here know that a government that's making billionaires pay nearly nothing in taxes, who pay less in taxes than someone who works an honest job, that's not right. That's not working for people. It's time we bring back our jobs and hold these mega corporations to account.
One of the things that's the reality, on the federal side of things, a lot of things have momentum, but sometimes they stall out. One of those things happened in the Voting Rights Act, and you talk so passionately about threats to democracy. What are some of the things that you feel like you could contribute to the conversation around protecting voting rights, especially as the Supreme Court is mulling about the Voting Rights Act right now?
It's been almost a decade since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, a law that had been on the books since the 60s that we had seen passed with big bipartisan majorities for decades. And there's a bill right now in the Congress, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that I'll be proud to support, that will bring us back to having meaningful federal voting rights protections like we used to have for decades. Because absent that, where we are now, it's easier for states to erect barriers to vote for eligible voters than it's been since the 1960s, since the era of Jim Crow. And I think we need federal action to protect voters all over the country, including here in Pennsylvania, especially with someone like Doug Mastriano fighting for the governor's mansion here in Pennsylvania and what he might do should he win this election. And it's not just on voting rights. I think we need reform around how we count the electoral college votes. We can't have insurrectionists looking to 2024 to try to topple our government again. We can't have them pressing on the weak spots in our laws for how we do something as basic as count those votes. And I think people around here and all over the country know we need reform on how we fund elections. I'm running against a guy who's put $1 million of his own money into this race. There's so much outside dark corporate money that spews around in our politics that distorts our elections and makes it hard for people to wield the power they ought to have at the polls. So we need reform across the board to strengthen this democracy of ours. I'm very committed to that. I've experienced working on these issues, and I'm hoping to bring it to the Congress.
And like you said, you're running from, the North Hills to Wilkinsburg. What is your message? Because a lot of those communities have things in common, but a lot of the communities those communities are very diverse, not only politically, but racially, around age. So how are you bringing about all these coalition of supporters to win the general election?
Well, I've been trying to put and talk to folks as a central theme of fighting for our common good. That we are strongest here in Western Pennsylvania when we're standing together, when we're putting our shared dignity, our economic prosperity, our rights, and our freedom, when that's what comes first. And I think we know that the tactics of the big corporations and the outside right-wing groups are to divide us in all the ways they can, in all the ways we've seen. And for us to stand together, white, black, brown, young, old, you name it, we can push back, and frankly, people can have the power at the polls that they ought to have. For me, especially, having unions and workers as a part of my coalition is really important to me. I've been so lucky to earn that support. I think unions are our best opportunity to give people that path to the middle class, to build an economy that rewards work and not just wealth. And that's what I think we here in Western Pennsylvania, we know in our bones. That's something people are willing to fight for.
Talking about willing to fight for, we know people say this is like the most important election, and people say every election, but there's a lot of things at stake. You talked a little bit about what motivated you to run, but what do you feel is at stake in this election?
A lot is on the line in this election here in Western Pennsylvania and across the country. I mean, we have one of the most competitive congressional races right here in my district, the 17th. We have a Senate seat, we have a governor's race with huge implications for people's freedom, for reproductive freedom, for our voting rights, for whether we're going to have a government that's going to fight for people and give workers a shot to have a voice on the job, to push back against things like union busting, and frankly, whether we're going to finally start to roll back the decades of bad trade deals and decisions that I didn't agree with that shipped our jobs and our manufacturing and our supply chains all over the planet to China and wherever else. So I think economic, civil rights, things around our democracy, all these issues are at stake. And the contrast between me and other Western Pennsylvania Democrats and the right wing is just so clear to people, whether it's reproductive freedom, where they want to ban abortion on the right, even for victims of rape or incest, where they want to tell women what they should be doing with their reproductive choices and their health care, and their willingness to call into doubt our democracy and this Constitution. Those are real threats where we can have good faith disagreements about policies around taxing and spending. I don't think we should be having good faith disagreements around these basic ideas around democracy and freedom. And those are the stakes in this election.
And you're talking about those basic freedoms. We know since Dobbs, a lot of people have come down pretty strongly around access to reproductive issues. What do you believe can be done at the federal level, and what is something that you would like to see done in order to protect reproductive freedoms for Pennsylvanians?
Well, since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, we've lost that federal constitutional protection for people to be able to make their own choices around and their own decisions around something as sensitive as a pregnancy. What we can do at the federal government and the Congress is to pass a law. It's called the Women's Health Protection Act that would protect under federal law what the Roe v. Wade decision used to protect, so that people are able to make their own decisions without right-wing politicians dictating and frankly trampling on their freedom. We can do this in the Congress. The House of Representatives has passed it. It is stalled in the Senate. So we'll have to take it up, I think, in the Congress that I hope to be a part of. And I know if we flip the Senate seat here in Pennsylvania, we'll have the votes I think we need to pass it and give it to President Biden to sign.
And you're talking about a lot of legislation, like it is always, based on how many people, besides yourself are elected. And so how are you working to not only manage expectations if you do win, but still try to produce results for Pennsylvanians, given that a lot of times there is gridlock in Washington?
Gridlock is unfortunately too much of Washington, and I'm always pretty straightforward with folks. I promise what I will fight for, what I will try to do. I can't control who's elected in any district outside of this one, and nor can we. But I think it's important that we have a representative who's going to fight for the things we've been talking about here, for our economic dignity, our freedom, our democracy. And I think we in Pennsylvania, we've got a real opportunity here in my district, in the 17th congressional district, and in the Senate race with John Fetterman, that if we can win these races, we've got a real chance to have a Congress that can deliver for people, with majorities that are able to support legislation for working people, to protect reproductive freedom, to protect our voting rights and our democracy. We can win these races, and we can really be in position to deliver for people in Washington.
If you are elected, you would be considered one of the freshman congressmen. And so we know that committee assignments are something that's like super important when it comes to the federal level. Are there any committees that you would like to be a part of? Again, I know you may not get like your top spot given that you're starting, but is there a committee that you feel like you would have the best expertise and experience to contribute to?
It's a great question. One place I think I'd be able to have some impact as a new member of Congress is working in Veterans Affairs. As a veteran, someone who understands the VA, who's a patient of the VA, that's a place I think I could get some work done quickly. But I'm also, there's a real responsibility as a freshman member of Congress from Western Pennsylvania, where we're losing a lot of seniority between Congressman Doyle and Congressman Lamb, both not going to be in the Congress this coming year, to really throw some sharp elbows down there with the leadership about being in a district that is really competitive, that is central to who's in the majority, and trying to get the assignments that are going to put me in a position to deliver as best I can for Western Pennsylvania. So that's top of mind for me, is to fight and really throw those elbows down in Washington to deliver for this region above my weight as a freshman, which I think I have to do.
And, you talked a lot about, in previous conversations about being a veteran and what the reality is for a lot of veterans face, here in America. What are some of the policies that you would like the VA or other institutions to implement to better improve the quality of life?
One of the main problems I think that we've seen is the Congress has not adequately funded or staffed the VA to meet the need for veterans. It's a crisis of political courage, frankly. And I think too often the Republicans have blocked needed funding or tried to privatize the VA, when we know from lots of research, the VA delivers care at a lower cost and higher quality than the private sector. The VA pays less for drugs because it can negotiate drug prices than Medicare. Well, I'm glad to see we're finally letting Medicare negotiate some drug prices. So I think we need to really fight to staff and resource the VA appropriately. There was a bill that I was proud to see pass through the Congress with some bipartisan support, to see the president sign, that would provide care for veterans like me who were exposed to burn pits in places like Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere in the Middle East. Senator Toomey here tried to block the bill here in Pennsylvania. It was a betrayal of veterans. But for me, it gets to a basic value that I hold and that I think most Americans understand. When you send young Americans off to serve at war, you shouldn't then be penny pinching when the bill comes due to take care of them. And I'll never break that bond with my fellow veterans. I will always be fighting for our VA to be adequately staffed, adequately resourced, so that every veteran who has served is able to get the care that they have earned.
Thank you so much for that. And I know we have to wrap shortly. I did want to ask, one of the conversations, I guess one of the biggest critiques that people have talked about is like your role as a professor. Can you talk about what made you choose to engage in education, and what has that brought not only to you, but to your community?
Yeah, so principally my job at Pitt has been working at the Cyber Institute, doing policy work around threats to our democracy, around local governments, working and dealing with tech and cyber issues and threats to society in general. I've taught a couple classes at the law school, for instance, as an adjunct, and it's been a nice way to supplement my work to help shape future lawyers and help teach them about threats and issues around privacy and cybersecurity and the way those things collide with our democracy. I think these are things we're confronting in this government. We're dealing every day with cyber threats from abroad and from within this country. So it's a key and growing challenge, I think, to American life and the security of our infrastructure and our government. So it's something we're going to be dealing with, I think, for years to come.
And so can you just talk a little bit how people can find out more about your campaign, how they can get involved if they would like to, and what your website and all of that information is?
Yeah, absolutely. We're online at chris4pa.com, and you can find us on all the usual social media channels at chris4pa as well. So please check us out. Twitter and Facebook's really where our content is. And you can also email the campaign at info@chris4pa.com.
Perfect. And so last two questions. Outside of being successful on election day, what do you hope your participation in this race results in?
Well, certainly I hope we win. I intend to, and we're going to fight for that. I hope my campaign has unified people. I hope that it has given folks around here hope that we can demand more and better from our government for Western Pennsylvania, that we've got a real stake in this country's future, and that we in Western Pennsylvania, as we've always had, from making the steel to helping us win the Second World War and so much in the decades that came, that we have a real role to play in leading this country into the future, for whether it's our economic security or protecting our democracy and our freedom. Western Pennsylvania has always stepped up. I've always stepped up for Western PA and this country. And I hope that if nothing else, I've inspired some folks to do the same and think that we can do the same.
And so, you won the most competitive districts in the nation, as you said, working hard every day. What is bringing you joy and what is keeping you motivated to stay in this race?
What brings me joy, I'd have to say my family and my kids, and the little bit of time I get to spend with them. It's less and less as we get closer to election day, which makes it all the more special. But what motivates me is the same thing that motivated me to serve years ago. The reason I got into this campaign: I love this country. I love this region. I love the people here that we call neighbors and that I call home, that raised me and made me who I am. I think these fights that we're in, whether it's this campaign or the ones to come in the Congress, are fights worth having, and that I know we can win.
Well, Chris Deluzio, thank you so much for sitting down with us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. It was a real treat. Thanks for having me on.
And that has been a conversation with PA 17 Democrat congressional candidate Chris Deluzio. As always, we did send invites to everyone in the race, and Chris is the only one that responded. We do always, with our fall forum series, even with our spring series, invite people in competitive races to come and sit down. And the people who show up are the people that we talk to. We do impress upon everyone running for office to say it's very important that you sit down and talk to people, let people ask you questions so they know what they're voting for, because in the general, you're representing all of us, not just the people who you feel you should only talk to. So again, we do want to thank Chris Deluzio for sitting down and talking with us. We have a lot happening, here in Pennsylvania. Reminding you have until October 24th to register to vote. So please make sure you are registered to vote. For Pennsylvania, you have to be a resident. You have to be 18 by November 8th. And you cannot have been convicted of a federal election-related crime in the past 3 years. In addition, you cannot be currently serving a sentence of incarceration. So we want to make sure that you have the correct information. Make sure you are registered. Make sure, even if you are registered, you double check your registration. Sometimes things change. And if you did not vote in the last election, you want to double check your registration, because your polling place may have changed and you don't want to show up to vote on election day and be at the wrong polling place. So make sure you have taken the time, make your voting plan, double check your voter's registration, and we'll see you at the polls.